The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, slipped between a quarterly earnings report and a note from her assistant about rescheduling a call with investors in Singapore. Lorraine Webb noticed it the way you notice something that doesn't belong, the way you notice a stone in a shoe before you feel the pain. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy stock, the kind that announces itself before you open it. Her name was written in ink so deliberate it looked like someone had practiced the letters beforehand. She set it on the edge of her desk and left it there for 2 hours before she touched it again. The card inside was simple, black and gold. The wedding of Clifton Webb and Adrian Park. The date was 6 weeks out. At the bottom, in Clifton's handwriting, she still recognized it after 4 years. He had written 3 words, "Hope you'll come." She read those 3 words 3 times. Then she set the card face down on her desk, walked to the window that overlooked the Atlanta skyline, and stood there long enough for the afternoon light to shift. Clifton had not called her in 14 months. He had not acknowledged her publicly in longer than that. But he had remembered her address. He had written her name in his careful, practiced hand, and he had written those 3 words underneath, and she understood. The way you understand something your body knows before your mind catches up. That this was not an olive branch. This was a stage. He was building a stage, and she was meant to be the audience. She was 41 years old. She ran a company called Nora Systems, which she had built from a rented office above a dry cleaning shop in southwest Atlanta into a firm that now held contracts with 4 federal agencies and 11 Fortune 500 companies. The company did cybersecurity architecture. That was the short version people used at dinner parties. The longer version involved years of work that most people never thought about. The invisible scaffolding that kept data safe, the systems that caught intrusions before anyone knew they were under attack. She had started it when she was 29. With $30,000 she'd saved over 6 years working for other people, and she had grown it in the years when Clifton was still finding himself, still bouncing between venture ideas that collapsed within 18 months of launch. Those were the years he did not talk about now. She had funded the first office space. She had co-signed on the lease when his credit was thin. She had stayed up past midnight going over pitch decks with him for a software company he eventually walked away from. None of that was in the profile the business magazine had run on him last spring. The profile had called him a self-made disruptor and had a photo of him looking thoughtfully out a window. She had read it in an airport, waiting for a flight to Seattle, and she had set the magazine down and ordered a drink and said nothing to anyone about it. The divorce had been quiet. That was her preference. She did not want courts and depositions. She did not want her name in the sort of stories that followed public disputes. She had signed what needed to be signed, kept what was hers, and walked out of the mediator's office on a Wednesday afternoon in November and driven herself home and made pasta and watched something on television that she could not remember now. Clifton had moved quickly. Adrian Park was 28. She worked in marketing. She was photographed well. The engagement announcement had appeared in a social column 4 months after the ink dried, and several people had forwarded it to Lorraine with messages that said things like, "Did you see this? And are you okay?" and one message from her college friend, Tamara, that said simply, "He is a fool, and you are free." She had replied to Tamara with a laughing emoji and had meant it, mostly. So the invitation was not a surprise exactly. It was more like a confirmation of something she had already suspected he was capable of. He wanted her there so that she could watch. He wanted the people in the room to see her sitting among them, a guest at the table, not the woman who had once been his reason for everything. It was the kind of move that required a specific type of smallness to conceive. She understood that now. She folded the invitation back into its envelope and put it in her desk drawer and did not think about it again until Friday. On Friday, she called Tamara. "He invited me to the wedding," Lorraine said. There was a pause. "Tell me you're not going. I'm thinking about it." Another pause, longer this time. "Why? Because I want to," Lorraine said. And she meant that too. What Clifton did not know, what he could not have known, Because he had stopped paying attention to her the way you stop watching a show you think you've already figured out. Was that Nora Systems had spent the past 18 months quietly acquiring a smaller firm called Vantage Defense Partners. The acquisition had closed in March. It had not been announced publicly yet. Lorraine had been deliberate about that. The announcement was scheduled for the same week as the wedding. She had not planned it that way. The timing was coincidence. But she had learned, over 14 years of building something from nothing, that coincidence was less common than it appeared, and that timing, when it arrived uninvited, was worth paying attention to. She called her head of communications on Monday morning, a woman named Priya, who had been with Nora Systems for 6 years, and who Lorraine trusted the way you trust someone who has never once made the same mistake twice. The Vantage announcement, Lorraine said. Can we move the press conference to Saturday the 14th? That's the day of. Priya paused. That's a Saturday. I know what day it is. A beat? I'll make it work, Priya said. What Clifton also did not know was that among the people he had invited to his wedding was a man named Theodore Ashby, who ran corporate risk management for a firm called Cascade Capital. Theodore Ashby sat on 2 boards. One of those boards had been quietly reviewing Clifton's company, a data analytics startup called Meridian Insights, for a potential partnership. The review had turned up questions, not conclusions, not yet, but questions about reported revenue figures that did not align cleanly with what the due diligence team was finding in the underlying contracts. Theodore Ashby was a careful man. He did not speak before he was certain, but he listened carefully in rooms where things were said. Lorraine did not know about Theodore Ashby's presence on the guest list when she decided to go. She learned about it 3 weeks later, when a mutual friend mentioned it at a dinner in Buckhead, in the way that people mention things they assume you already know. She filed the information away without comment and let the situation continue to arrange itself. She RSVP'd yes on a Wednesday. She used the formal response card, filled it in by hand, mailed it with a stamp. No text message, no email. The response card, the envelope, the stamp. She did not bring a date. What she did bring was a woman named Constance Obi, who was the head of security at Nora Systems and who had, before that, spent 9 years in federal law enforcement. Constance was 6 feet tall and moved through rooms the way people move when they have spent years being underestimated and have decided that it no longer concerns them. She did not wear a uniform. She wore a charcoal suit with a white shirt and pearl earrings, and she stood 2 steps behind Lorraine the way a chief of staff stands behind a head of state. She also brought Nadia, her director of strategy, and a quiet man named Franklin who handled investor relations and who had, at Lorraine's request, reached out to Theodore Ashby's office the previous week about a potential meeting. They drove together in a black car. Lorraine wore a deep green dress, structured at the shoulder, simple at the hem, the kind of garment that reads as effortless from a distance and reveals its quality only up close. She wore no jewelry except a watch that had been a gift to herself on the day Nora Systems crossed its first $100 million valuation. She had never told anyone what the watch meant. She did not need to. The venue was a hotel outside Buckhead, the kind of place with a fountain in the front and a coat of arms nobody had earned above the entrance. Valets stood in a row near the circular drive. A string quartet played something unobtrusive in the lobby. Lorraine walked in and did not slow down and did not look for Clifton. She saw him find her first. She knew this because she felt the change in the room, the particular shift in ambient attention that happens when a person in a crowd suddenly focuses, suddenly stills. She had learned to feel that shift without looking. She continued to the seating area, accepted a glass of water from a passing server, and exchanged a brief greeting with a woman she recognized from a nonprofit board they had both served on 3 years earlier. Clifton came over within 10 minutes. He was wearing a custom suit, ivory with thin lapels, the kind of suit that announces itself. He looked at Constance first, then at Nadia, then at Franklin, and then back at Lorraine, and his expression did something complicated that he was not quite quick enough to hide. "You came," he said. "You invited me," she said. He smiled. The smile was the one she had always recognized as performed. The smile he used when he needed to appear relaxed. I'm glad, he said. It means a lot. Congratulations, she said, on the wedding. She said nothing else. She returned to the conversation she had been having. Clifton stood for 2 seconds longer than was comfortable, and then moved away toward a group of men near the bar who greeted him with the loud warmth of people who are trying to establish the mood of an evening. Lorraine watched him cross the room and felt something she had not expected. Nothing dramatic, no bitterness, no residual grief. Just a clean and clarifying recognition of the distance between what he thought this moment was and what it actually was. The ceremony was held in the hotel's main ballroom, white flowers everywhere, a cellist 200 guests seated in rows of gold chairs. Adrian Park was young and beautiful, and looked genuinely happy, and Lorraine held that observation without cruelty. The happiness of a 28-year-old who did not yet know what she did not yet know was not a thing to begrudge. During the reception that followed, the conversations were the kind that happen at events like this. The surface-level reconnections, the professional check-ins wrapped in social language, the compliments to the couple exchanged like currency. Lorraine moved through it with the ease of someone who had spent years in rooms where the conversation mattered and the cocktails were incidental. At some point in the second hour, Theodore Ashby found Franklin near the appetizer station. The conversation lasted 12 minutes. Lorraine did not hear what was said. She did not need to. She saw the shift in Franklin's posture when Theodore mentioned something that caused him to straighten slightly and set down his plate. Later, Franklin came to find her near the terrace. He'd like to speak with you directly, Franklin said quietly, when you have a moment. She took a sip of her sparkling water. Tell him I have a moment now. Theodore Ashby was a thin man in his late 50s with the particular manner of someone who has spent decades in institutional finance. Careful, measured, given to pausing before he spoke, as if he were running the sentence through a filter. He shook Lorraine's hand and said he had been following Nora's systems for some time. The Vantage acquisition, he said. It hasn't been announced yet, she said. No, he agreed. But people talk. He looked at his glass. I had questions about Meridian, about the revenue structures. She waited. Your name came up, he said, in the context of the early capital arrangements. Some of the contract architecture in the early years of Meridian looks familiar to people who have looked at Nora's early infrastructure. He paused again. That's not an accusation. I want to be clear about that. I understand, she said. I'm more interested in understanding the sequence, he said. And whether you'd be open to a conversation sometime in the next few weeks. I would, she said. She handed him a card. He looked at it and put it in his jacket pocket, with the particular care of someone who does not lose things. Across the room, Clifton was watching. She did not look at him. She finished the conversation with Theodore Ashby and thanked him, and moved back toward Constance, who was standing near a column and who gave her the small nod that meant, all clear, all fine. The sequence of events that followed, the ones that would occupy the business press for several weeks afterward, began at approximately 9:47 that evening, when a reporter from a financial news outlet published a story online. The story had nothing to do with the wedding. It had nothing to do with Lorraine. It concerned Meridian Insights and a series of consulting contracts that the company had reported as active, which, according to sources, had expired or been restructured. The story was careful. It attributed everything. It named Theodore Ashby's firm, Cascade Capital, as having suspended its partnership review pending further clarification. Someone at the wedding saw the story on their phone during the reception dinner. Someone else saw it. The information moved through the room with the particular velocity of bad news in an enclosed space. Not loudly, not all at once, but in small clusters. A lean-in here, a turned phone screen there, a conversation that stopped and started differently than it had before. Clifton saw it too. She watched him read it, the way you watch. Someone read something they cannot undo. His face went through stages. She recognized all of them. He looked across the room and found her. She was standing near the terrace doors, her glass in her hand. Constance 2 steps behind her, the city lights visible through the glass. She looked at him and held his gaze for exactly long enough, and then looked away. Not in anger, not in satisfaction, just back toward the terrace, toward the quiet air outside, toward her own evening, her own life, which was and had always been her own. She left before the cake was cut. She said brief goodbyes to the people she had spoken with, thanked a server who brought her coat, and walked out through the lobby with the same pace she had entered with. In the car, Constance didn't say anything for several blocks. Then, "You good?" "Yeah," Lorraine said. She was looking out the window at the city moving past. "He saw you leave," Constance said. "I know." "He didn't follow," Lorraine said. She said it without contempt. It was just a fact about the kind of man he had turned out to be. Not the kind who follows, just the kind who watches. She was home by 10:30. She changed out of the green dress and hung it carefully, and made herself a cup of tea, and sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open. She read the financial story twice. It was thorough. She had known the questions about Meridian existed. She had encountered some of the same contract documentation in her own early years, and had recognized the scaffolding immediately, the way a builder recognizes borrowed structure. She had not filed anything. She had not made a single call to a journalist. The story had found its own surface and broken through it, the way these things do when the foundation has been compromised for long enough. The press release about the Vantage acquisition went out at 9 the following morning. Priya handled the calls. By noon, Nora Systems was in 3 separate business news cycles. By 2 o'clock, Lorraine was on a call with a journalist from a major outlet who wanted to profile her. The trajectory, the journalist said, from the Southwest Atlanta office to now. Lorraine said she'd think about it. She called Tamara that afternoon. They talked for an hour, about nothing much. About Tamara's daughter's school play, about a restaurant they'd been meaning to try, about whether Atlanta summers were getting worse, or whether they had always been this bad and they had simply been too busy to notice. At the end of the call, Tamara said, "So, how was it?" Lorraine thought about the cream envelope on her desk. She thought about Clifton's face when he read the story on his phone, and Adrian Park at the altar looking genuinely happy, and Theodore Ashby putting her card in his jacket pocket with such careful hands. She thought about Constance standing 2 steps behind her like a woman who does not need to be loud to be understood. She thought about the green dress hanging in her closet and the watch on her wrist and the city she had built something in, from nothing, with her own hands, 1 year at a time. "Fine," she said. It was fine. And she meant exactly that, not as deflection, not as modesty, but as the most accurate word for a night that had asked her to be diminished and had found, instead, that there was simply nothing left in her that could be made small.